Hey guys, I'm Lou, and in today's video I am going to be doing the Anti TBR Tag, which means that I'm going to be talking about popular books that I won't read. This is definitely going to be hard for me because I'm the sort of person who will read books that I know that I won't like. And I'm willing to try anything and give authors multiple chances. The lovely May tagged me to do this video. I will leave her video and her channel in the description box down below. You should definitely check her out if you haven't already. She's great. Thank you so much for tagging me, May. The original creator is Nicole from Nicole and Her Books, and I'll leave her channel in the description box down below as well as the original video. The first point is a popular book that everyone loves that you have no interest in reading. This is a difficult question for me to answer because a lot of the books that I don't want to read come from people warning me that it's problematic or a bad book. So by definition, it's not a book that everyone loves. An example of this is Eleanor and Park by Rowell. It's a popular young adult book which is anti-Asian and racist. It was popular when it first came out, but now it's become a lot less popular with the criticisms of this book. But it's still being adapted by Hollywood. I'm pretty sure it's just Hollywood trying to jump on the success of Crazy Rich Asians and To All the Boys I Loved Before, but they could have chosen a better book to adapt. There's also the concern that they got a Japanese director to direct a book with a Korean American love interest, and if you don't know, there's a long history of conflict between South Korea and Japan, so you know if something goes wrong with that movie, if it's received poorly, it's literally going to cause problems with politics. Let's go over the criticisms of this book because why not? So the Korean American male that I talked about, his name is Park, and he suffers from internalized racism that is not explored in the book. And then you have the fetishizing and exoticizing of Park throughout the book. There's descriptions like, Park looked dangerous like Ming the Merciless. His eyes are green but almond shaped, almond flavoured and almondy, as well as his skin being described as honey, which some see as a way of the author saying that Park was yellow, which has racist roots towards Asians, plus Park's Asian features are described to have negatively affect his appearance. There's also racist depictions of Asian women, with Park's mother being described as a China doll, as well as romanticizing the relationship between Korean women and American soldiers during war times. And then you have the fact that Park is called Park, which is a common Korean surname, but it's his first name. Rowell's reasoning is that Park is his mum's family name, and his parents thought that it would be nice for him to have both surnames as his name, so Park Sheridan, as this is fairly common with American families and Rowell's family, which I personally think is a bit weird but okay with American families. But it's not taking into account the fact that Park's mother is a South Korean immigrant, and it feels a bit like lazy reasoning, especially because if you research the importance of Korean names in Wikipedia, like you don't even have to look far. On Wikipedia, it literally details the importance of it. And if you're curious as to know why Rowell made Park Korean, her reasons range from her father serving in Korea in the army and being in love with a Korean girl, to old Asian American high school classmates, and the lack of representation in young adult books during the time the book was released, and perpetuating anti-black stereotypes. And Eleanor compares hiding from her abusive father to Anne Frank's diary, which is quite insensitive. I got all of this from Wikipedia, by the way, and I'll link the page down below, but I basically said most of the controversy surrounding this book. But the book that comes to my mind when I think about a book that everyone loves but I have no interest in reading is The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas by John Boyne. I feel like potentially quite a lot of people could be surprised about this, but I have numerous reasons as to why I have no interest in this book and no desire to pick it up. The first being what it's about. It's a historical fiction book set in World War II in Auschwitz-Birkenau. The story follows the friendship of Bruno, who is the son of a Nazi commandant, and a Jewish boy called Shmuel. For me, I really struggle to read books set in wars, set in World War II, just because of the tragedies that occur. In addition, when I was a child, I was spoilt for the ending, so I've never had a desire to read it because I knew what was going to happen. Now, as an adult, as a person who studied history at university, who's a historian, and my main focus with history was modern European history, I feel like this book is quite dangerous. Let me go into those reasons. When you study history in university, you're basically taught how history is taught and how it's manipulated. And The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas is taught in schools. It may even be one of the first things which children come across when they're learning about World War II. And this book has received quite a lot of literary acclaim, and it's even been adapted to a movie. Even when I was in school, they were teaching students about this. My concern, and many other academic historians, is simply the fiction that it portrays. Because when you're a child, even when you're an adult, you do have to question what's being told and what's being taught to you. Of course, I haven't read this book, but I've done research about this book and I am going to talk about it now. I will link an article from the Holocaust Learning website. It's the website for the Holocaust Exhibition and Learning Centre that was developed by the University of Huddersfield. It's an academic source. It's something that you should trust to a slightly higher extent because it's an academic source. If I was writing an essay, I would be happy quoting them. I'm going to summarise the article here, especially because I haven't read this book. This article is being used as one of my arguments as to why I have no interest in reading this book and why I personally think that it can be kind of dangerous to teach to kids. The narrator of the book is Bruno, who is the son of the Nazi commandant, and apparently in the book it is portrayed like Bruno has no idea about the war around him. However, in reality, Bruno would have been a part of the Nazi youth by law, and he would have been taught about the war in school, which is important because the main premise of the book is loss of innocence. It also perpetuates the belief that German civilians at the time had no idea about the war going on around them. And then you have the Jewish boy which Bruno befriends in the concentration camp. The article states that as an audience, we learn a lot about Bruno. However, Shmuel is only depicted as a one-dimensional victim. Shmuel has no personality or individuality, so the audience doesn't build an emotional connection with him. This means that it's harder for the reader to empathize with Shmuel and his situation. It goes on to say that Shmuel's characterization portrays Jewish victims as passive and unresisting. However, Jewish resistance did exist both in and outside the concentration and death camps. Plus, you have the historical inaccuracy of the fact that had a young boy like Shmuel entered Auschwitz-Birkenau, he would have either died on arrival or he would have survived but been a source of experimentation. In addition, the Auschwitz-Birkenau Holocaust Memorial Museum have stated that The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas should be avoided by anyone who studies or teaches history of the Holocaust. Now, you might argue that this book is historical fiction, it's fake, you're not going to take it seriously. But the problem I have with it is that it is marketed towards young children and teenagers who aren't taught about historiography, like the history of history. So younger readers might not understand to a full extent just how much of this is fiction. And if you're curious, the author responded back to the museum saying that his work is a work of fiction and therefore by its nature cannot contain inaccuracies. I won't read any of John Boyne's other books as well because he was the author that wrote My Brother's Name is Jessica, which is written from the perspective of a boy whose older brother is transitioning into a woman. And seeing as John Boyne is not trans and has not transitioned, it is highly likely that he misrepresented trans people in that book. And I do personally feel that if you're writing a story like that, you should probably leave it to a trans person who's gone through that, because he is most definitely taking a voice away from someone who could better tell that story, because you know he could write any book that he wanted because of his past success, whereas trans people are probably really struggling to even get published in the first place. Now on to point 2, a classic book or author you have no interest in reading. I'm not really interested in reading classics in general at the moment. I'm partially interested in Asian classics and modern classics, but everything else I don't. I feel like I should read them. Will I? Probably not. One I know that I probably will never read is Les Misérables by Victor Hugo, mainly because of the size of the book. I think it's 1,500 pages or something. I know that if I were to ever read it, it would most likely put me into a reading slump. Point number 3, a problematic author whose books you have no interest in reading. I have 3. The 3 that I'm going to be talking about is James Dashner, J.K. Rowling, and Tatsuya Matsuki. James Dashner. I have never had an interest in reading The Maze Runner. I don't particularly have an interest in reading dystopian books unless it's primarily science fiction or fantasy first. So never had an interest even at its peak popularity. And then in 2018, he was allegedly accused of sexual harassment, grooming and gaslighting, so now I'm definitely not going to read him. J.K. Rowling, because she is a TERF. It's really sad because I do enjoy the Harry Potter books, but I don't think I could ever look at them the same, and I most definitely won't be reading any more of her works. I don't even know if I could read the Harry Potter series again. And I know I'm not missing out much because I previously have read the first 2 books in the Cormoran Strike series where she uses the pen name Robert Galbraith, and like, they were okay. They weren't great, so I know I'm not missing out on much. And then you have Tatsuya Matsuki. You may or may not have seen this video that I published around about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I did a video review of Act Age Volume 1. I filmed it in May of 2020, but I finally got around to editing it and publishing the video in February. I really loved that manga. It was one of my favorite manga reads of 2020. I received an advanced reader copy from the publisher, I read it, I reviewed it, and then my review was on the NetGalley front page. I'm pretty sure it still is for that book. I even requested volume 2 on NetGalley when it was available and reviewed it. Before I published that video, I should have done more research about the manga since my filming of the video, and I do apologize for it. I do want to thank the person who commented on that video. I have since privated that video, you can't find it online, but I've lost their name because I've privated it, but thank you for telling me about what happened. Back in May of 2020 when I filmed that video, the author was fine. There was nothing problematic about him yet to be revealed. Fast forward to August of 2020, the manga series was cancelled by the publisher when the author was arrested for indecent acts against a teenage girl. Since I've found out about it, it's left me feeling really uncomfortable, especially because of the plot of the series. It's completely tainted my love for that series. The series follows Ki, who is an aspiring actress, and she wants to provide for her twin siblings where she is the sole provider for them. She ends up working with a director who mentors her and takes her under his wing. After finding out about the arrest, it's completely changed how I saw that relationship in the manga. Point number 4 is an author you've read a couple books from and have decided that they're not for you. It's quite hard for me to answer this question because I am the type of reader who thinks that authors improve the more books that they publish and the more experience that they get with writing. I'm also happy to give an author multiple chances as long as their books interest me. Plus, I'm also happy to read books for videos and read books that I know that I won't enjoy. So the only author that comes to mind when I think about this question is Liz Braswell. I read A Whole New World, Once Upon a Dream, and As Old as Time by her. They are all Disney fairy tale retellings, but with a major twist which changes the entire plot of the story. For example, A Whole New World is an Aladdin retelling, and the twist is that he wasn't the one that summoned the genie, Jafar was. I ended up giving all of those books 2 out of 5 stars. I didn't like the twists. I felt like all of those twists, the way that they played out, it fundamentally changed the story too much. For example, with Aladdin, I remember that one of the favourite things I loved about the movie was the relationship that Aladdin had with the genie, and of course in this scenario the genie and Aladdin meet only like twice, and Jasmine becomes a bit like a rebel princess in the story, but like I wasn't sold on the romance. All the twists I didn't enjoy. Point number 5 is a genre you have no interest in, or a genre you tried to get into and couldn't. The only genre that comes to mind to me for this is self-help books. I've never tried them. I have no interest in them, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to improve myself. I just think that self-help books won't help me. Point number 6 is a book you have bought but will never read. Honestly, for me, so many books could fit into this category because at one point I had over 1,500 books, and since that point I've been trying to sell pretty much 99% of those books because I'm moving to Korea. So literally any of those books could fit into this category. But one book that comes to mind is A Shadow Bright and Burning by Jessica Clues. I bought this book back in 2018 when it was described by a booktuber that it was like the Infernal Devices because it was set in Victorian London. The Infernal Devices is one of my favourite series, and so when I saw my local bookstore had it, I bought it. I was excited to read it, but then I completely forgot about it because 1,050 plus books. It was just sitting on my bookshelf collecting dust, and then the author became problematic. So I unhauled that book and I won't be buying any more books from that author. I will leave an article down below detailing why the author is problematic. But she essentially got dropped by her publisher after she tweeted some racist thoughts and insulted a person for wanting to change up the classics that students studied. Point number 7 is a series you have no interest in reading or a series that you started and have DNF'd. For me, it's Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerri Maniscalco. It's a young adult historical fiction series that follows Audrey, who is interested in forensic science and she solves crimes. I read the first 2 books, Stalking Jack the Ripper and Hunting Prince Dracula. I even bought the next 2 books in the series and the novella, but I honestly don't think I'll ever read them. I ended up even unhauling the physical books to one of my best friends. So I don't even own this series now, and even though I can get all 4 books for £3.99 on the UK Kindle store, like, that hasn't tempted me. I like the first book. It's set in Victorian London and the serial killer that it focuses on is Jack the Ripper. But it was incredibly predictable. I knew who Jack the Ripper was going to be pretty much as soon as they introduced the character. And the clues weren't subtle, they were billboard signs. The second book was slightly better at concealing the mystery. I think it's because the author had more experience with writing, but I was reading the books as the books were being published, and so during that time I'd lost interest. With my previous feelings of the mysteries not really feeling like mysteries, I think I've just given up on that series. I do have an interest in finding out what happened with the romance, but it's not enough for me to push through and read 3 books. I did attempt to read the 3rd book, Escaping from Houdini, but I just couldn't get into it after a few pages and I didn't want to get into a reading slump, so I just DNF'd it and gifted it to my friend. I have since read The Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco, so it's not the author. I think it's just that series. Now, the final point, a new release you have no interest in reading. This is another hard question for me to answer because unless I've heard negative reviews about a book, I would most likely have an interest in picking up a book that is a new release. It also depends on how you define a new release. For this, I am going to choose The Desolations of Devil's Acre by Ransom Riggs, which is book 6 in Miss Peregrine's Peculiar Children series. It was published on the 23rd of February, so it's a very recent release. I have nothing against this series, this author. I love seeing the relationship between him and his wife, Tahera Mafi, on Instagram. They're so cute. I love seeing the writer couple. It's just that I've owned 5 books in that series for such a long time. I haven't got around to reading them. I don't think I ever will. I even own 2 copies of the first book. I think it's just a case of I will never get around to reading them, so I have no interest in reading book 6. So those were my answers for the Anti TBR tag. I'm sorry for the dark topics that I discussed. I do want to thank May again for tagging me. It's been so long since I've done a tag and since anyone's tagged me in anything. I feel so special. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Bye!